Alright, today we're back with the Amiga 1000 and the Parceiro II. And I'm currently formatting a disk to make sure it's still good. What we're going to do today is we're going to install Workbench 1.3 on a fresh SD card. So the Parceiro II, when you get it, is packed with an SD card that has a pre-set up Workbench. This is nice if you just want to get started, but I kind of want to start from scratch. So I'm formatting a disk. We're going to load that disk up with some of the Parceiro tools. Then I'm going to eject, obviously I have to power off the system, eject the SD card that is in there, and put in a new SD card, partition it, copy Workbench 1.3 over there, and do some basic initial configuration of it. So let's begin. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, formatted a disk, and now I want to get all the Parceiro tools on there. So in the Parceiro directory, David Dunkley has provided some ADFs to get started. And so we use this disk, ADF to disk utility that he also wrote, or I'm assuming he wrote, to transfer this SDToolbox .adf to a disk. Now I think this there's also this SDToolbox kick 1.3. I think this is a combined kick work disk, which I don't want because I want to copy some additional things on here. So I'm perfectly fine with having a separate kickstart disk. All right, so ADF to disk from SDToolbox.adf to df0 to my freshly formatted disk. This will take a while, so we'll fade out while this is writing and then fade back in. Alright, so this disk is now complete. So if I do a dir of df0, I should see Parceiro tools and some other stuff. So that's good. Now, one thing I've noticed about this disk, this ADF, is I've done a couple dry runs against this, is I don't think it has quite all the current commands on it. So I'm going to CD into my disk at C, and I'm going to copy a couple commands from SD0, which is the bootable Workbench here. And really, I'm going to use sys because I think it's SD0, but I'm not sure. But my bootable Workbench disk, I'm going to copy RTC to here. RTC is the command that runs the real-time clock. I've noticed the one on the disk doesn't behave the same. It complains about the RTC being low or not present. And I think it's just maybe for the Parceiro 1 instead of the Parceiro 2. I'm also going to copy, let's see if this is here, SD format. Which I think is a command that is meant to format the partitions once you make them. We'll see if it's actually needed. I'm also going to copy ADF to disk, and then disk to ADF. Because these are useful. And trans ADF doesn't seem to work with 1.3, or at least the version on AmiNet does not. Yeah, those I think are the only Parceiro 2 specific ones. I'm just doing a quick visual scan because they're in modern practice, we would generally have these commands be all lowercase. At least that seems to become common. You know, that's how they are on Linux and Unix. So, but in classical Amiga style, the native ones are camel case. Now, the Amiga OS doesn't care. It's case insensitive. The file system saves case, but it itself is case insensitive. But it's just an interesting little stylistic difference there. Alright, so we've got those utilities. There are a few other things that I want to gather here. So, notice that on this install, there's a nice icon for the RAM disk and also for the different partitions. Looks like a little SD card with a check mark on it, with the Amiga check mark on it. So I'm going to copy those icons because I like them. I'm not sure about the RAM disk icon, but it's better than nothing. And I'm going to make a directory called icons so I can save them on this disk. And then the icon file and the info file for each drive is stored as a special file that's normally hidden by Workbench called disk.info. So if I do workbench1 disk.info, I'm going to copy that to my icons directory and call it sddisk.info. And same thing with the RAM. Alright, good deal. And so now both of those icons are saved. So when I go to start up my new system, I'll be able to use those icons because they're not part of the regular Workbench. All right, let's see. Is there anything else that I need or want from here? So I think one of the things I want to check is the SDToolbox version. So this is SDToolbox version 1.3 from either January 7th or July 1st, 2022. Since David Dunkley's an American like me, I'm assuming this is July 1st. Now let's check the version on disk. Different icon, so maybe it's a different version. Yeah, so we can see this one's older. This one is from November 23rd, 2021. So let's discard this one, and hopefully there's enough space on this disk to copy the new one. But we'll see. If there's not, we'll start deleting stuff. When you get hardware made by one person, I mean, just the amount of work that goes into this is incredible. So the fact that these ADFs are not up to date, doesn't really surprise me that much. Alright, so that seems to have worked. Let's make sure it starts up off this disk. And we'll have the latest version of all of these different things, which is great. Yeah, so this is 1.3 from 7/11/22 as opposed to the older version from 21. Alright. Good deal. So now we have our disk made. We'll eject that. Now is the time to turn off the machine. Alright, so we are now booted to the SDToolbox. The new SD card is in place, and as a result, we don't see anything besides the SDToolbox disk and the RAM disk. So let's load up the SDToolbox. Alright, so got the SDToolbox. You can see it's already detected the SD card size. I have a roughly 2 GB card in here because of some differences between definitions of gigabyte and megabyte. This renders as 822. Is a little under. That's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother time. We also see the number of cylinders. Cylinders is kind of an out-of-date unit for hard drive capacity, and we'll have to use cylinders here, but it's just a number. And since I don't have anything, we could load the RDB from the SD card if I wanted to make modifications, or from a file if I had a backup or a preloaded one. I'm just going to create a new one. I'm going to leave this DOS MBR enabled. This will allow me to create an exfer partition like on the included SD card. And next I'm going to add my file systems. So RDB, unlike say DOS master boot records or other things, allows you to actually load file system drivers into the hard drive itself, and this helps when the Amiga is auto booting, right? Because part of the operating system is in ROM. When as part of the boot up process, it will auto mount certain file systems. Well, in order to auto mount certain file systems, it needs to have a file system. It needs to know how to interact with that file system. And so the solution is to put the file system drivers into the RDB structure that's on the hard disk. So there's a driver for it. And as a result, we can load in things like the fast file system or other drivers here and have those auto mounted even if we don't have that driver for that file system on our disk. Normally, you have to know some magic numbers and things like that, but David's tool here makes this very easy. I do plus fast file system, and it puts in the correct version of the fast file system. And this fast file system is actually a binary in the L directory on our drive. And we can see this has a DOS type of a particular hex string here. That's a magic number, so you just kind of have to know it. We'll also add in FAT95, and David has an option here for Professional File System 3, which is a newer and now open sourced file system for the Amiga. It's a bit faster than FFS. It's got some advantages, but I want to go old school this time, so I'm not even going to bother with it. Next, I'm going to do my partitions. So for each of these partitions, you have to specify a drive name. Now this is freeform text. It could be whatever you want. I could have in here Workbench, and that's okay. Unlike say DOS partitions where they're numbered or other things, here you have a freeform label. By convention, you would do things like HD0 or something like that. But on David's original card, he used SD0, SD1, and I think that's a good convention. Now, one thing to keep in note about this is these names follow the drive. They don't follow the and they're not system unique, and therefore it can be hard to identify like the first partition on a hard drive programmatically. And if you like take a hard drive from another Amiga and put it onto an Amiga that already has a hard drive, if you pick the same thing for these drive names, SD or HD, then you're going to get volumes with the same name, which the Amiga can handle. It just starts to get a little strange. So, keep that in mind. Not really an issue here because we can only put in one SD card at a time. But if you're taking this over to like another Amiga that has an SD card reader, it might be an issue. I don't know. That maybe is something we'll look at later on. Alright, so I have my name here. And actually I want to call this SD0. This is going to be my Workbench drive. And I want this to be 100 megabyte, or roughly 10 megabytes. Now I've noticed these plus and minus things here don't really work, so I just enter in a number of cylinders. Each cylinder on this SD card at least is roughly 256 kilobytes. So if I do the low cylinder is 2 and the high cylinder is 1, that gives me 12 megabytes, which is, about 10. So this will be my Workbench drive. And we'll make it mountable and bootable, and, in all cases here, with a priority of 0. Floppy drive priority is 5, so this means it'll still boot the floppy drive first, and then if nothing's in the floppy drive that's bootable, it'll boot this SD0. Alright, there's our first partition. So, typically, in Amiga partitions, you have a Workbench and you have then like a work. That's the default partitioning arrangement in Workbench 1.3 or 3.1 and all that. And it's been convention for a while. So I'm going to add 2 more drives, which I'm going to format as work, and I'm going to format as data. And these are going to be SD1. We will again select our DOS type as 444F5301, which is a fast file system. And I want this one to be around 100 megabytes. And so that's, I think, roughly 800 cylinders, 900 cylinders. There we go. 900 cylinders is exactly 100 megabytes. Or really, I should say, this is having the high here be 900 cylinders. The total number of cylinders for this drive is the high minus the low. So that means this is what, 899, give or take, 799. Anyhow, 100 megabytes. So that's like our work or our other partition. Let me add one more here. Now the reason I'm making such small partitions is because I've noticed bugs in old pieces of software where they do not calculate disk free or have weird behaviors on very large drives. And really in the period, right? So in the period we're talking like late 80s, 100 megabytes would be a huge drive. Yes, there were others there were larger ones available, but generally speaking, if you had a hard drive, it was probably under 100 megabytes. Maybe 40, could be as low as 10 or 5. And if you had a 100 megabyte disk, you paid a lot of money for it. And so having this much space on a machine of this era is just incredible. Or it would be incredible to someone in the time frame. So, oops, need to make sure my drive name here is unique. That's the only constraint, is it has to be unique per, unique on the disk. So there can't be two of the same ones on the same disk. So anyhow, now I've got my three pretty modest sized partitions. Of course, in the context of the day, these are huge. And I want to add one last one, and we're going to call this one xfer. And again, remember, this drive name is arbitrary. I'll put whatever I want to in here. I'm going to make the DOS type on this 4615401, which we can see is the DOS type for FAT95. And I'm going to make this the max. So this is going to be a big partition. And we'll use this to transfer back and forth ADFs and things like that. So I think our actually need that space. May keep a copy of the Fred Fish archive on there or something, something like that. So we're pretty much done here. We've added our file systems and we've added our partitions. We have 3 fast file system partitions, and we have 1 MS-DOS FAT95 partition. And the most important thing here is that none of the cylinders overlap. And so we can see that's true. We see this one starts at 2, ends at 100, and then the next one starts at 101, goes to 900. Next one starts at 901, goes to 1704, and the next one goes to 1705 to the end of the disk. We don't want any of these to overlap because bad things will happen, right? If you have them overlapping, then when you write data to one disk partition, it's going to affect the other one. So that's really the most important thing, is to make sure none of these overlap. The other important thing we have is we have our one of our drives here bootable. This is going to be our bootable Workbench disk. And, we should be in business. So I'm going to save this to the SD card. And obviously, this is an action that's going to overwrite critical data structures on the disk, and very likely if you do this, you won't get any data back off the disk, or it'd be hard to recover data off the disk. So make sure you're doing it to an SD card that you actually want to. It doesn't take very long. And there we go. It's now written to the SD card. It instructed me to power off. But now before I do that, I am going to make a backup copy to disk of this partition table, just in case I need it. If you do something that happens to overwrite the partition table but not the data, you can sometimes reload the partition table and still be able to access your data. I've actually had that happen to me, although in Workbench on my Amiga 4000, messing around with Shapeshifter, and I wish I had a backup RDB from then. But anyhow, we will see. Hopefully I have enough space on this disk. And success. Now if I didn't have enough space on the floppy disk, it seems like this SDToolbox 1.3 doesn't handle that situation so gracefully. So I actually had to re-record all of this. But it told me to power off, so I'm going to quit from this. And then I am going to power off the machine. And then power it back up. Alright, so now we are booted back up, and we see our SDToolbox, and we see all of our different disks here in various states of not good. They need to be formatted. Now, you may be tempted to just click on them and go up to initialize, but let me tell you, that's going to take a long amount of time. And that's because that initialize up here, which really just runs the format command, formats the disk, erases a disk a cylinder at a time, and then lays over a file system structure. And this is useful for like a floppy disk where you want to make where it's a less reliable media, and you want to make sure that everything's good, and all that. And in fact, historically on hard disks, you would probably want to do the same. This is an SD card, very reliable, so it might be better, and it's certainly faster, just to use the format command. So the format command's fairly straightforward. We do format drive, and then we do SD0, give it a name. I want to call this one Workbench, and we'll say fast file systems quick. And what this will do, the quick format dispenses with initializing every single cylinder of the disk, and instead just lays down an empty file system. What this means is if someone did some analysis on it, they could still find traces of the old data and all of that, and we haven't gone and run through every cylinder to make sure they're good, but because it's an SD card, I feel pretty good about this. And we'll do the same for SD1. We'll call this one just work. And then the last one, we will give a try to the SD format utility. Now this is something that came with the Parceiro, and so this actually explicitly says non-fast file system volume. So we'll skip over that and maybe try that for Xfer. So format drive SD2 name data fast file system quick. Whoops, and actually I don't want that to be data all caps. So we'll just rename it. Oh yeah, won't let me do that there, but I can do that up here. I forget how to do that on the command line. Alright, so now I have my workbench, my work, and my data. So the only one that I haven't formatted yet is Xfer. I was kind of planning to format that on the PC, but let's see if this can take care of it. Well, certainly did something, and copied the nice icon.